Welcome, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Vasquez, the CEO and co-founder of WEConnect International. We are thrilled to host an incredible group of over 300 leaders from around the world today for our conversation about the intersection of supplier diversity and inclusion and the metrics we can use to measure environmental, social, and governance impacts, or ESG. We have a dynamic lineup of panelists whom I'll introduce in just a moment, but to begin, this conversation comes at a perfect time. I was just in New York City last week with many of you for the 77th session of the UN General Assembly and the other incredible convenings that take place on the periphery. And that week of intense discussions also helps to explain why I lost my voice. But the discussions last week centered around urgency because of our global community that has less than a decade to deliver on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the audacious agenda set forth in 2015 for 2030. As we barrel towards that deadline, what we are seeing more and more is a focus on the intersection of supplier diversity and inclusion and the ESG agendas of global corporations, governments, multilaterals from around the world. Investors are increasingly looking to non-financial factors as critical elements of their analysis and identifying material risk and growth opportunities. And more, investing and creating more inclusive global value chains to engage more underutilized suppliers that might be owned by people with disabilities, for example, members of the LGBTQ+ community, indigenous or ethnic minorities, and of course, women who still represent only 1% of the spend of large buyers globally. I would argue that gender-inclusive sourcing in particular brings with it a built-in multiplier effect to help achieve the SDG and ESG agendas of organizations large and small. If you think about it, on the environmental front, women-owned businesses in general build businesses that do no harm. They're more likely to innovate and build businesses that are sustainable, as they are more often than not intimately familiar with the negative impacts of pollution and climate change on their families and communities. In society, when women-owned businesses have the opportunity to grow and expand, they hire more people, they reinvest back into their families and communities, and they tend to focus on building economic opportunity for underserved and traditionally marginalized people in need, their people. And this multiplier effect of positive impact is key for global impact at scale. And finally, on governance, women-owned businesses are typically considered outsiders, building businesses that challenge traditional norms and forms of corruption. And as a result, women tend to increase local transparency and accountability as they become integrated into global value chains. ESG takes the holistic view that sustainability extends beyond just environmental issues as a framework to help stakeholders manage risk and increase opportunities to have a positive impact on our world. This is why today's conversation about how we spend our money and who we pay for products and services is so important. There is an untapped resource that exists in the linkage between supplier diversity and inclusion and the demands of the ESG agendas of your organizations. So let's get to it. I'm so pleased to welcome an incredible group of panelists to the virtual stage. Today, we're joined by our moderator, the amazing Sheila Gunderson, Chief Procurement Officer at Moody's, as well as Kai Noel Zell, the Chief Procurement Officer at Accenture, Tammy Dukes, Vice President of Global Sustainability of Adient, Janelle Orozco, Chief Procurement Officer at Diageo, Denise Naguib, Global Vice President, Sustainability and Supplier Diversity at Marriott International and the Chair of WEConnect International, and Lisa Zukowskas, the Chief Procurement Officer at Organon. It's my great privilege to turn the mic over to Sheila to get us started. Sheila?
Terrific. Thank you, Elizabeth. So I am so excited to be moderating this event, and it's a long time in the making. ESG is at the forefront for Moody's of what we do, how we measure ourselves and how we look at how we serve our communities. And so this is an area of conversation that's near and dear to my heart, as well as to Moody's in general and how we want to behave. So what I'm going to do is go around, and I think we'll first start with if everybody can tell us a little bit about the ESG efforts in your organization, how long it's been in place, a little bit about some of your key objectives. And so Kai, how about we start with you?
Happy to do that. So hi everybody, and it's really a great pleasure to be here and having this discussion about a super interesting topic. So as I was already introduced, CPO of Accenture, probably don't need to introduce so much about the company. Pretty big company, connected to probably a lot of people and folks here on the call, either by being one of your service providers, being one of your partners, or you being one of my partners, so to speak. And it's always a pleasure to be at conferences, and I have to say, I even like the virtual ones at least equally, if not more, because it leaves us in our offices and not creating carbon. And especially in my case, being now in my home office, so I just had the pleasure to just walk into the office, don't take even the car to get anywhere. And I think it's this type of disruption and thinking we have to take this topic forward, right? Because as Elizabeth also said, we have not that much runway left anymore especially on the sustainability side of the house. I think we have a lot of runway still to make the world a better place in the way we treat diversity, how we work together, how we think about human rights and so on and so forth, even though every day is a critical day to also improve, but especially on the environmental side, time is flying by and runway is running short. From a little bit to what we have been doing, or I have been doing, I'm now 5 years the CPO, so I'm not even claiming that I started a journey. I had the pleasure to take it over from somebody who was wise enough to start it much earlier, and it goes probably as back as 2007. So in 2007 we started, and since then we progressed the journey constantly and try to add more topics and to it. I think from a structural thing, I think ESG is a quite interesting logic to address everything you need to address as a company, right? In the way you responsibly behave in that environment you are working in. And I think in terms of the structure, the whole structure needs to come from the top, right? If that is something me as a CPO tries to sell bottom up into an organization, it's also worth it, but it's so much more painful. It is so much easier to basically have it embedded as I will sometimes call it the mindset. It's a real mindset that a company is architectured around and how you're running it. And in terms of the things we're trying to address, I think all topics are equally important. The E side is important, and in our case, it's probably more, it's really about net zero by 2025, which I find challenging but possible. But it's also 100% recycle of e-waste, which is a quite interesting and quite intense thing we have in our business. On the S side, I really see one of the most critical roles as a CPO is to develop a supply base, to develop and enable a diverse supplier base. And to do that, you need to adjust corporate structures, and you need to help the suppliers entering that corporate structure to align, to understand, and to partner. So here it's really all about integrating. And then I think the G part is important. But as I started to talk about the mindset, if it's a mindset, the governance, I may be too optimistic, it comes almost automatically. Yes, we're still striving for 100% ethic on compliance training. We try for huge audits on supplier behavior, on the reporting we do. But I think the G part for me is that one where it's really the trick between, is it coming as a program, or is it coming as a mindset and a company architecture, I would call it. And that's a little bit how we have been doing it. So I have the pleasure to have that program now up and running for 15 years. And I'm sure the next 15 years are as challenging and as exciting as the last 15 were. I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture, Sheila, how we are sitting in that whole discussion.
No, that's a great overview. And I think I put a little follow-up around recycle of e-waste, but we'll come back to that. So Tammy, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the ESG efforts in your organization.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for inviting me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk about our sustainability program. I work for Adient. Adient is a global seating supplier who supply to all of the major original equipment manufacturers such as Ford, Volvo, Stellantis. But we provide a variety of seating for all of the models of their vehicles. And so talking a little bit about our sustainability program, it's probably been in existence for probably around 3 years. We, we started off just, doing the basics, making sure we're understanding all of the elements that need to be tracked and be able to report it out on. So we did our first sustainability report in 2020, but our 2021 report had a lot more data points that were important to, number one, our investors, as well as other people within our organization. And so when I think about all of the different points within our sustainability program, of course, we've got the E, the S, and the G, and the environmental piece of this is probably the most complex when I think of all of the 3 areas, and that we've got so many data points and things we need to track as it relates to our environmental efforts, which include making sure that we are reducing and monitoring our greenhouse gases, making sure we're committed to anti-deforestation activities to make sure we're being impactful in that area, and making sure that we're using renewable energy and electricity sources throughout our organization, as well as making sure not only are we being a sustainable product manufacturer, but that we are developing sustainable products. And so we have to look at it from both of those lenses. So we look at our product design as well as our manufacturing. We look at our employee engagement, as well as a whole host of other areas that are touch points from an environmental standpoint. How we're structured, of course, we have a liaison who I am connected to, who's a part of our Adient board. And then we have an ESG steering committee who has oversight over all of the activities as it relates to ESG. And then it's myself, and then we have the 3 arms, the social, the governance, as well as the environmental. And one of our challenges is what we're finding is making sure that we have a consistent program across the E, the S, as well as the G. And the social piece was sort of lagging, and making sure that we're able to adequately monitor and report out on all of the things that we're doing, because we're doing some really great things in the social area. Our impact from engagement with the community, as well as our DE&I efforts. And from an DE&I perspective, we have had several, we've set it up where we've got diversity councils in each of the regions in which we operate, which is EMEA, Asia, Pacific, and then North and South America, or the Americas. And so we have diversity councils in each of those regions. And so things are driven regionally. We give broad range of what we have as far as our strategy from a DE&I perspective, but they have to be managed regionally because there's different data points, privacy issues in which we have to make sure we're mindful of when we are developing and implementing programs in each of those areas. And so we go by the mindset that we want to make sure that we are addressing those specific needs for each of those regions. And so some of our short and long-term objectives, making sure that we have a really good program where we can monitor all of the efforts as far as, making sure we have an inclusive work culture, making sure there's a sense of belonging in each of the regions, and make sure that all of the contributions for our employees are that they're recognized and that we see them. And so that's one of our main initiatives. And then making sure we're increasing our numbers as it relates to those who are in the pipeline for that includes diverse talent, and making sure that we have that we're adequately tracking those sorts of things. Some of the other objectives is making sure that we have a good deforestation policy and the initiatives around anti-deforestation. We are really tracking that very heavily because it was very interesting. About a year ago, we did a materiality assessment from an environmental standpoint. And we had identified the top 3 or 5 things that we thought that were on the radar for important things that we need to be tracking, and deforestation was not on that list. But in less than a year to a year and some months, that became one of the focal topics in the environmental space, and we had to really get up to speed as far as deforestation is concerned. And so we put together some specific resources around deforestation and putting together some initiatives for that. So in all, we've got several, things going on. It's a very complex environment, and the sustainability ESG space is moving really fast, and we are really just trying to keep up. And so in order to do that, it's great to have interaction with people like you who are going down the similar path. We are nowhere near being mature, but we know that this journey is moving us in a direction that we want to go to have a positive impact on our people, our environment, as well as our processes. And so thank you very much.
Tammy, thank you. So that was a great overview. I want to ask you, Janelle, same question for the company ESG efforts. How is it structured? How long has it been in place? What are your kind of key objectives, short and long term?
Sure. Thanks, Sheila. So Diageo, for those of you who don't know the company, is a global leader in beverage alcohol with more than 200 amazing spirits and beer brands like this one on the wall behind me, Talisker. So we've been similar to everyone else. We've been on this journey for a little while, but I think we really ramped it up probably about 8 years ago when we started in North America, specifically working on our supplier diversity program and putting that in place. And then more recently, last 2 years ago, as a lot of companies did, we announced our 2030 goals, which we collectively call our Spirit of Progress targets. So we have 25 global goals. In those 25 global goals, I think 4 of them are owned by procurement. So there's a huge role that we are playing in really driving those specific goals, but clearly there's a role we also play in supporting a number of the other goals. Broadly speaking, they're grouped in kind of 3 categories. One is around positive drinking and limiting the alcohol-related harm, given what we do. That's one of our areas. The second one is around inclusion and diversity. That looks at both the workforce as much as our supplier diversity programs. And specifically, a goal to call out in that space is we've committed to increasing our spend to 10% globally. And I think that's a key part because we were already on that journey in North America, but this is a global goal. So 10% globally by 2025 and 15% globally by 2030. And then the third pillar that we have is around our environmental sustainability goals. And I think specifically in that space, the one to call out is we've committed to a 50% reduction in our scope 3 carbon by 2030. And I would say, probably a lot of the other people on the call, that is for sure the hardest, most complicated, most complex goal that we have, because we make products. 90% of our total carbon footprint is scope 3, is bought in from our suppliers. And so that is a really significant a target to go after. When it comes to kind of how we're structured within my kind of 400-person procurement organization globally, I actually have 35 roles dedicated to kind of ESG, sustainability type of topics, whereas a year ago that would have been 4. So I think that's quite a significant increase and upweight that the organization has put behind, showing that we know this is important, but also that we won't be able to achieve these goals. We won't be able to move the needle if we don't start now, if we don't spend, people and also money to go after making these things happen. So look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Janelle. 4 to 35. I mean, that just tells you, the impact that is behind this for us as companies. And I do think kind of getting to where we're putting a little bit of our people and our money where our mouth is going to be the difference sometimes between success and not being successful in this space. So thank you for sharing. So Denise, if you could tell us kind of the same thing, overview of the program and key objectives and structure.
Sure. Thanks, Sheila. And thanks, WEConnect, for hosting us today. It's really great to have this conversation. So I've been fortunate to be in my role for over 10 years, leading the supplier diversity element alongside the sustainability side, which I'd had for many years before. So I'm really excited. I like to have a lot more people on the journey with me on this ESG pathway here. From Marriott International perspective, one of our 5 core values is serving our world, and that's really where our ESG platform really tethers into. We are on our second generation of goals for around the ESG platform. Our first set of goals took us up to 2017, and we're now celebrating the next month our 5-year anniversary of our new platform, which is called Serve 360, doing good in every direction. And for those of you who don't know, Marriott International has over 30 brands under the portfolio with 8,100 plus hotels around the world. And we do a lot by influence because we don't own most of our assets. We own about 20 or so of our hotels. So a lot of work happens, in the building and at our regional offices, but ultimately it's all tethered to this platform that rolls out across the globe. So our platform really focuses on 4 areas of focus. Nurturing our world is where we really focus on developing and supporting communities around the world and supporting our biodiversity and natural ecosystems around the world. Sustained responsible operations is where we really focus on what happens within the 4 walls from an environmental perspective. How do we reduce our environmental footprint? How do we source more responsibly? How do we partner with our developers to drive more sustainability in that built environment, really thinking about all of those potential impacts, both of our travelers and our hotel operations. Third area of focus is empowering through opportunity. And this is where our DEI efforts sit. This is looking at both, things like driving our diversity within our supply chain, our associate base, ownership of our hotels, supporting youth and people at risk from around the world, refugees, to be part of our workforce. And then the fourth and very important area of focus is welcoming all and advancing human rights. And really, as a hospitality company, obviously we want to be open doors and welcoming people in, no matter what their thoughts are, but also really understanding and respecting human rights. So I know we'll talk about human trafficking, awareness, and some of those areas of focus, but that really rounds out our 4 areas of focus under our ESG platform called Serve 360. And when we stood this up 5 years ago, we built within it a governance structure. So we already had a diversity, equity, inclusion committee at the board level that expanded to be more ESG focused. We also stood up our executive council as well as our advisory council, so sort of our chief leaders from around the world gathering at least twice a year to discuss this topic in more rigor, to get education, and then our advisory council, which meets every quarter, again, kind of the number 2s across the world in all of the representative disciplines to really help drive these actions, to look at progress, to see where our goals are, where we need to dial up more efforts. And then kind of we have a regional team that is not employed by the sustainability department or social impact, but really are volunteers as part of the regional teams to help support and drive these efforts. So again, a lot of work being done through influence. And really, we really have to lean in and lean on our associates around the world to really drive these efforts. This work does not get done unless hotel associates are passionate, engaged, and driving these efforts from the ground up. So that's, while we have a very top-down, bottom-up structure is just as important as we think about this. We do measure our progress against those goals, as I mentioned, and we report them regularly through our ESG reporting cycle, which will be out next month. So take a look for that. Back over to you, Sheila.
Terrific. No, that's great. And I think when we think about having volunteers and a little bit of groundswell, that does go a long way. So, I mean, I think that's imperative as part of our approach. We can't always just be top down. Some of it has to be, right, but then having that groundswell is excellent. Lisa, so if you could share kind of the overview of your ESG efforts and how long they've been in place, the structure, a little bit of short and long-term goals.
Sure. Thanks, Sheila. So I think we're in a little bit different stage at Organon. So Organon, for those of you that don't know, we were spun off from Merck just over a year ago this past June. So we took the women's health business and some established brands, as well as some biosimilars. So we're in our first year. We actually just published our report. We're very proud of publishing our ESG report this past June. We consider it, significant and imperative in terms of building a successful brand for our company. And in developing it, we did interviews across the company. We're about 10,000 people. We also interviewed all of our top investors, as well as did a materiality assessment to inform the program. The program is managed by our head of ESG, who reports directly to our CEO. And like many of you have said, we obviously have a board committee that oversees it, but Geraldine Ritter is our leader, and she's just been tremendous in getting cross-functional partnership across the entire enterprise to really support ESG. So we spent many months together late last year to develop what should be our program and our short and our longer term goals. Everything at Organon, because we're a women's health company, is about her. So, making every day better for her. So when we think about ESG, we have her planet, her equity, and her trust. So her planet is all about our reduction programs. So we have short-term and more longer-term reduction programs, 2025, 2020, 2030, sorry. We have her equity, which is where diversity and inclusion sits, both supplier diversity as well as diversity, belonging, and inclusion for our founders. So our gender equity efforts across the organization, sustainable packaging and access to our products. A big thing for us is her access to medicine, and that sits squarely with her equity. And then trust is where all the governance comes in, as well as data privacy and human rights and all of the governance parts. I think somebody mentioned maybe 35 folks that they had in their organization. So my procurement organization is about 124 people. So I'm pretty proud that I actually have 3 people that are dedicated at this point. So one is supplier diversity, one is ESG, and one is energy. And I would say, we've just published our first report, so we're early on in our journey, and I'm looking to learn a lot more from all of you that have been much more experienced than us at this. Thanks.
Lisa, thank you. Yeah, so, the journey is interesting because I think as we build our programs, there's a little bit, if you build it, they will come, but I think there's also that board exposure that is really going to help things out, as well as investor exposure that's really going to make a difference in the space, right? So let's go kind of to the next question. When you think about global inclusive sourcing, and it's been around for a while, but I'm feeling like this is the great time to reinvigorate this, right? But how does this fit into your ESG efforts? What successes have you had lately in driving this program, or challenges even? So, Kai, how about we start with you again?
Absolutely happy to do that. And first of all, let me also express how encouraging it is to listen to all my colleagues and see how we all taking that journey forward, right? And if you, what I said earlier, if you think about how connected we are, so Denise also being one of my big partners on probably both sides, we being theirs, they being us, that's what does the trick, right? And that is whatever Denise does helps me, whatever I do hopefully helps her as well. And probably that is how I also want to answer a little bit this global inclusive sourcing thinking. And that is, it just has a value. I believe that everything we are doing has a value, and you need to tie this value to all your practices. And especially what we are seeing, and I'm strongly believing in, is that a lot of innovation is coming out of a supply base that, I don't know whether the word traditional is the right word, but that is the traditional suppliers. It's probably not. You always need to disrupt yourself in the way you deliver, the way you create value by bringing in new sources. And our belief, and not only belief, evidence is that there is a lot of innovation coming out of inclusive sourcing, out of diverse supply base, out of entrepreneurs, out of women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and so on and so forth. So for me, I'm not even sure whether I want to decouple it from how I usually do sourcing, because it's part of that decision process to create that high value. But what I'm also appreciating is, and that's probably a little bit the challenge, but also the success is, as companies entering a marketplace, you need to enable them to enter that marketplace. And to enable them to enter that marketplace, and a lot of people may have heard me talking a lot about this type of practice and how we take it forward, is it requires big corporates like us to change the way we do business. And it requires the companies we want to partner with to change the way they do business. And what I mean with change is, I'm not saying they need to look like me or I need to look like them, but what I mean is we both need to understand each other. And one of the successes I'm seeing in that space is that the moment you invest in developing partnerships and in developing suppliers, but as I said, not making them look like me, developing them to understand how to connect to corporates, but not giving up their own authenticity. And I think that's, for me, one of the other big one. If I believe in the value they create, they need to be authentic. And if I want to make them just mainstream, they are not, and then I'm losing that innovation. So for me, that is really one thing. And the second thing, all of this, and I called it earlier, the mindset and this behavior, it just has a huge, huge value to the company, because it attracts talents, it attracts new partners. In my case, it also is relevant to win and convince clients that I'm a credible partner to partner with. I think somebody said 90% of the science base is coming out of scope 3. 82, it's on my side. It's exactly the same, right? So I'm super dependent on the innovation and the ESG efforts that are driven out of my supply chain, out of my suppliers. So that's the type of thinking that I have, that inclusive sourcing has a lot to do with the word partnership, and partnership for me has a lot to do with value and innovation. That's how it's embedded, but it's embedded, right? It is not attached. It is embedded in the way we approach the market. And I think that's potentially the way forward. It's not, let's not us remind us all the time we must do it. No, we're doing it because it has this value that is undoubtable.
Yeah, I love the idea of embedded. I think some of us, you might be a little further along the journey than some of us, where we're still in measuring and really, pushing it in versus it being embedded. So that idea of that value and innovation, and it's what we value in our workforce. So I think, valuing that in our supply chain is important as well. Tammy, can you tell us a little bit about the, your guys' efforts in the inclusive sourcing space?
Sorry, I had to take myself off mute. Yes, we have a very strong global supplier diversity program led by, in North America, it's led by Sherry Dyson, so shout out to her. But we truly believe that having a diverse supply base is very important to our organization, as well as to our community. And we have made significant strides in this area. And we put our money where our mouth is as far as this is concerned. We have a joint venture with a company called Bridgewater, who is right here in the Metro Detroit area. And we want to make sure that not only that company, but all of our diverse suppliers, that they continue to succeed and build as we have built to this point. And so we are making sure that we track our metrics as far as this is concerned, to make sure that we're trending upward when we are engaging with our diverse suppliers, and making sure that they have a seat at the table when we're looking for sourcing for new materials, new projects, new services, and that sort of thing. We do definitely want to make sure that they have a seat at the table. Our program has had some very good successes, and not to include, we received a Superior Supplier Diversity Award from Toyota, as well as we've received recognition from other sources as well, as including WEConnect. And so as we continue to go down this path, we want to definitely make sure that our diverse suppliers are going along with us, and make sure that they stay as vibrant as we have to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Janelle, can you talk a little about the inclusive sourcing program?
Yeah, I mentioned our targets earlier, but I think probably talk a little bit about the program, because we have really two key pillars in we call our global value chain inclusion and diversity program. One is around accelerating inclusion and diversity across our value chain by increasing our spend with diverse owned suppliers and agencies year over year. But the second element is really around diverse representation. So we know that we will still work with a number of important suppliers that are going to be publicly traded, that are going to not be diverse organizations, and a number of our large suppliers are not diverse owned suppliers, and we want to not forget them. We want to continue. We know that they still also have quite a big impact. So we look at that not just from kind of a tier 2 perspective, although we absolutely do look at tier 2, or we really do in North America. We're starting to look at that globally, but we also want to make sure that we increase their diverse representation within their organization. So that's another key part of our program. When I think about challenges and successes, we've actually had a really fantastic first year, and Manuela, who leads the program globally, is on the call. She's done an amazing job. I think one of the key challenges has actually been that starting point of getting to a definition of what you're considering to be a diverse supplier across a really diverse set of kind of 180 markets that we work in. Women is very clear and very straightforward, but getting to that clear definition across the other areas and what's going to be included was one of the main struggles. But again, we were able to land that in each of our markets. I think another struggle and opportunity has absolutely been data. So how do we work on getting clean data, looking at spend, looking at how do we tag the right suppliers that are diverse? And again, Manuel has done a fantastic job of pulling data in from a number of sources, because we know that we need to be data driven in order to drive the right conversations, in order to drive the right insights, to continue to push forward the programs. If I think of a couple of key successes that we'd like to share, one is around really making sure that this is a business owned program, right? This is not about a procurement program. I think Kai, kind of talked about it has to be really integrated into kind of everything that we do. So whether that is our sourcing processes, or actually just in really going out there and advocating internally for all the people that are buying things and are making decisions about, working with agencies, working with suppliers where, procurement may or may not be the decision maker, and encouraging them to understand the program, to understand what we're doing, and also to help them understand what suppliers and agencies are out there for them to work with. And so, we have champions across a number of different parts of the business and across the procurement organization. So people that aren't dedicated to doing this full time, but absolutely are there to champion, to be a single point of contact, to help encourage and really advocate for the program in their market or in their region. So that's one of the things I would say. And I think the second one I would share is matchmaking. So particularly in North America, we started this program around how do we know that it takes, in any instance, whether they're diverse or not, it often takes a long time for a supplier from the time they're introduced into a company before they actually we get to buy something from them and they get integrated into the system, and then obviously increase their spend. So we started a program in North America with matchmaking, where we were really working with our marketing leaders, and procurement was screening and going through and working with a number of different diverse agencies, and then bringing them in just for literally a matchmaking session to just get them visibility, get them in front of the right people, and know that we needed to sort of start small in kind of seeding in those relationships, and that would build over time. And so because we've been successful with that in North America, we're now looking at how do we do that in other places as well.
Yeah, I love the idea of matchmaking. Let's move on to Denise. Can you tell us a little bit about the inclusive sourcing at Marriott?
Sure. As I mentioned, one of our 4 areas under the ESG platform is specifically focusing on our empowering through opportunity. And that's really how we look at our diversity and inclusive sourcing efforts for our suppliers. We want to open the doors so that suppliers can come in and be able to competitively bid on business. So we have a standard requirement. It's kind of one of our, very big policies, if you will, that we have for our hotels that are managed, as well as our corporate teams, that if they are putting out an RFP or an RFI at $100,000 or more, that they need to include a diverse supplier in the process, or they need to apply for an exemption to that, explaining why they weren't able to do that. So our team is here to catch when those requests come in, but we also provide tools and resources to help our teams help themselves and identify those diverse suppliers. We also have a large third-party CPO that helps us with a lot of our contracting in North America. They've adopted the same programming and policy within their sourcing process for us, so that, again, they are seeking diverse suppliers throughout the bidding process as they look for contracts on our behalf. So that's really the first step, right? Opening the doors to get more diverse suppliers into the program. Our supplier diversity program has been around for 25 years, and while it has been officially global for much of that, I think one of our challenges is to really be able to be present in lots of different markets around the world. We do have procurement teams in various markets around the world, but they are, not fully embedded in every single place that we are, and they're technically not fully accountable for supplier diversity on their own, right? We are different in that our supplier diversity, our inclusive sourcing efforts do not sit under procurement, but are supported and aided by procurement. So again, back to influence, we try to do a lot of education. We've created an educational tool to be able to help guide our procurement leaders around the world. What does this mean? How does this look like? What are some of the ways to do it? What are the resources that they can tap into? The databases we have, access to our nonprofit partners, encouraging them to be able to connect in with events like WEConnect and be present, especially with the virtual nature now. So many more can participate because it doesn't impact budgets as much in terms of travel, so they can participate virtually in some events. So really encouraging those efforts, holding ourselves accountable to metrics, driving those metrics internally, reporting against those metrics. We had 2 specific goals that we were working towards. One was to get over $500 million of diverse spend. Initially it was supposed to be by 2020. We were able to reach that by 2019, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, our numbers, got cut in half. We lost about half of our total supplier business, basically diverse supplier business, throughout that pandemic time period. And as you can imagine, our business itself was hit, and so we weren't spending very much money, and we're just now starting to ramp up and really reading the metrics and understanding, okay, we're seeing spend come back, but we're not seeing diverse spend come back at the same rate. Why? What can we be doing to help understand that? And then really empowering those decision makers in the business. Again, my team and I don't buy anything, and so it's really about how do we educate and influence those, and again, really connecting it also to the ESG platform, right? We have a specific company-wide effort. We've got goals and efforts on there. We report on that regularly. So making sure people understand this isn't sort of a side hustle that we're working on, but really part of and an instrumental part of how we speak to our stakeholders, investors, customers, associates, et cetera, and understanding that it is part of the responsible business holistically.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect that I'd love to hear more about. There's so many, I'm writing them down, follow-ups that I want to get out of this, but that idea of the diverse suppliers, that the trend that you lost a lot of them in the pandemic, and then how you're not seeing it rebound. So, I think that's going to be important to everybody, regardless of space. We did, I think a lot of us saw that there was some shifts given the pandemic. So, Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about the inclusive sourcing in your company for equity, and if that's where it sits? I can't remember, but I'm loving those tags, by the way. But tell us a little bit about the program.
Sure. So the thing I think I'm most proud about with the program, and Cheryl Hoffmeister, who leads supplier diversity for us, is on the call, is, as a new company, she was able to really work with our diversity, belonging, equity, and inclusion organization to get supplier diversity included in how we look at diversity across the enterprise. So when we rolled out our diversity, belonging, equity, and inclusion program, our external components of that were integrated into that whole enrollment and platform, if you will, and burning platform. So we've been able to get commitment across the enterprise that this is part of what we say about her equity. And great support there in terms of the program itself. So initially we are focused on doing some incremental in the short term, doing some incremental increases to what we've inherited. And I think, like Denise said, we've lost some ground on some of that spend as well, right? So we're looking at incremental increases, but by 2025, we're looking to have a 25% increase in that spend over what it was when we came into spin. But in addition to that, what I'm really proud about is we have commitment, from the board and from our ESG committee, that we really want to start in 2024, 2025, measuring more of the economic impact. So where are we creating jobs? Where are we creating better wealth with our diverse bases? And really focused on we are a more ex-US company than we are a US company at this point in terms of where our sales and our spend are. So we are broadening our definitions in terms of using global definitions for supplier diversity. We're in not a unique position, but we're in a good position in that we are coming off of spin. We are right-sizing our supply base for Organon, right? We're a much different type of company and geographically different company than Merck. So we have an opportunity where we do have a turnover of how we're sourcing. So we have an opportunity to really expand our focus on diverse suppliers. Cheryl's been leveraging our employee resource groups as well to help create a pipeline of not only projects, but of suppliers that we may not be looking at. And I'd say the other thing that we're focused on is where we had things that were truly just pass-through of dollars, and not going after just spend, as I said earlier, and really focusing on how can we put together, think about this, we're a women's health company, so we're gonna run an event around Nexplanon, right? How do we put together women-owned companies to run that event so that the women that are buying the products and the sales folks that are selling the products can actually see themselves and vice versa. So we're very excited about the program, and as everything else we've talked about today, we're very early on. We're a little over a year into it.
No, I think that's an incredible idea, and to carry that thinking through from events to other areas. On sustainability efforts, kind of going back to that, so for Moody's, it's pretty high on our, all of the ESG initiative areas are high for us. We've set a net zero goal, and we've also set a goal for our supply base that 60% of our suppliers by spend will set science-based targets. And so, for us, it's all about that partnership with our suppliers. And it's also about educating suppliers, as well as the ones that are diverse, the importance of this in our space. So just wondering for you all, when you're thinking about your sustainability efforts and how they're organized and the targets you're setting and what you're doing from an outreach program. Kai, can you maybe share a little bit about that?
I think that's a super complex question, right? I think from an outreach, I think it's all about collaboration, right? I said it. I think we all saying it. It takes efforts. It takes collaboration. It takes transparency. It takes data that you need to share. But somehow it also takes progression. What I mean with that is, if you think about a lot of targets that we as companies are reporting on, still for a lot of them, there is no one single point where you go and get the right data. So we started to approach it from a revenue approach model to say, okay, what is companies A carbon emission topic and how much revenue do I generate with a supplier? So I take my share divided by total. I don't think it's accurate, but it was the first good starting point. It gave us some sort of a first indication. It gave us a first direction to go after. But companies are so diverse in what they are buying, and they are so diverse in what they are supplying. So take an average of a company like Amazon is probably, if I'm more a logistic customer versus an Amazon web customer, the carbon is probably very, very different. So I think that's what I mean with progression. We need to put now a lot of effort to really nail it down to the activity and to what it really means to me and to my activities and to their activities in my supply chain. And then even have somebody looking at it very neutrally and confirming it. And as we all having the same challenges, I think that's the other part of progression is today it's a lot of one-to-one efforts, and it needs to be a many-to-many effort. And ideally it is data-driven and AI-driven that it automatically comes. So that's what I mean. It's a super complex question because there's a lot of theory talked about. Then it's hard for us as procurement leads to really make it translatable, tangible, measurable, auditable. And the moment we are done, the next measure comes. And the moment we are done, the next complexity and granularity comes. So for me, it's always the intent that needs to fit and then the progression to get there. But I think this is worth probably another 2 hours of discussions, but that's where I'm seeing it from a revenue model to an activity model shifting, and with that it becomes much more targeted.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I think it's definitely not a one shoe fits all situation here. Adam, you've joined us from Intel, and I wanted to kind of back up and just give you an opportunity to take us a little bit through the ESG framework at Intel, and then if you can also tell us about how your sustainability goals are set up currently.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I think similar to a lot of people online, our organization is set up with across a variety of ESG and other programs, including supplier diversity in my team. So many people have interacted with our program managers, Clay Atkins or Meg Stowe. And that supplier diversity work that we do is really integrated within our supply chain and very similar to what Denise was saying about bringing suppliers to the table. That is our priority. We certainly need to have the cost and quality, availability, and capability of any of our suppliers. So it really is bringing them to the table and supporting them to win the bid. When it comes to our goals, the other part of your question is our ESG or sustainability goals have been really integrated across the entire company. We have our acronym for this is RISE, which is responsible, inclusive, sustainable, and enabling. But the cute acronym aside, what that really means is that we as a company came together across a lot of our work, whether it's supplier diversity or workforce diversity, whether it's environmental scope 1 and 2 carbon as a direct manufacturer that is significant to us, our supply chain environmental work, our responsible mineral sourcing, our environmental impact, both in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it, as well as we're a chemically intensive industry, which may be different from a lot of the folks online. So there's a regulatory and green chemistry factor to that. So bringing those together into a set of corporate goals so that the entire company can see, contribute to, understand, and get motivated to move those balls forward to meet our commitments, whether the commitments to regulators, investors, customers, employees, that full suite of people who care, that contribution is communicated across the corporation in somewhat of a unique way.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I think the program, I don't know, how long has it been around at Intel?
The RISE program really came, we published that at the beginning of 2020. It really was a group of folks across the company who had different goals, setting 2025 goals, 2020 goals, et cetera. And as we got to that stopping point of 2020, we realized that we could bring those things together. So those are a set of 2030 goals that we published starting in 2020. Now that we're a couple of years down the road from that, we're seeing ways that we need to make adjustments, need to clarify the numerators and denominators of certain goals, or maybe enhance them. I think net zero is a great example of that. Is when we started, we had pretty good environmental targets. We're seeing the move towards net zero as being a clear demand in our industry for our customers and our entire value chain, and we're responding to that. We've published a net zero goal this year.
Great, terrific. Tammy, sustainability, how does that fit in with ESG and your goals?
Yes, so it's definitely very integrated into all of our goals from the top down, making sure that we are being able to, have a lesser impact on our environment. And so we're making sure that throughout the organization, from engineering to manufacturing to purchasing and our supply chain, making sure that we have a good understanding of what are the biggest, motivators of the impact to the environment, and making sure that our supply base, we understand where it is in our supply base, because again, 92% of our carbon emissions comes from our supply base. And so that only leaves 8% within the walls of Adient. And so trying to garner the information as it relates to our supply base, that is the challenge, and making sure we're getting good response rates as far as, their impact to the environment, and making sure we've got the right tools and technology in place to be able to capture it and monitoring it month over month, year over year. And so having the right processes and procedures in place, being able to validate the information that's coming in is all a significant lift and heavy effort for the organization. But we're coming to a point where we're going to have to make sure that we've got good data. right? And making sure that we've adequately documented it, and making sure that we can validate it. And with the looming, SEC climate change disclosures coming down the pike, it's a super focus on it at this point. And we've got to get this right so that we don't get in trouble down the line.
No, I agree. I think it's growing to be a bigger and larger initiative than we ever thought before. And then the reporting and the capability to report out on it becomes extremely complex. And you think about where you're getting all of this data from, and they're not from the same systems, or they weren't built to even perform this stuff. So that's definitely one of the issues.
Right.
So same.
No, really quick. And I mean, just to think, we have over 100 manufacturing locations across the world, right? And making sure that we are consistently capturing that information is a huge challenge, and making sure that everyone understands the magnitude of what they're reporting and how we're reporting it and how we're validating it is key. And, so you have to make sure that from a regional perspective, that we've got our hands around that.
Yeah, definitely. Janelle, so tell us a little bit about the sustainability efforts there. And
yeah, sure. I mean, I think similar to the other kind of comments, right? It's very complex and data is a challenge. What we've tried to kind of look at is using the data that we have, right? We know that we're going to continue to work on improving our data, and I absolutely agree with Tammy, right? We're going to have to get to the point where it's auditable and all of that. But in the meantime, we know we have to get going, and we have to start now. And so we've been really taking the 80-20 rule in this space and saying, okay, we're not going to have perfect data, but we know, for example, glass. We buy a lot of glass bottles to put our products in, and that is one of our single largest contributor. It's 25% of our carbon. So we know we need to very much target in that space, because it's actually something that we're a big buyer in glass. As an industry, it's something that we buy from something like 75 different furnaces globally. So again, it's still very complicated, and we need to be getting after it right now, because we have a lot of influence on those suppliers to encourage them to be looking at how they're going to reduce their carbon footprint, how they're going to go to green energy sources, et cetera. The other big area for us is around regenerative agriculture, because we actually really are an agricultural company, and we're taking it, instead of converting it into food, we're converting it into alcohol. But we very much are buying a lot of raw materials, and actually agriculture is very much a key part of being able to combat climate change and changing to more regenerative practices. But those things take time. You're talking at least 3 years of working with farmers on changing their practices in order to get to a payback where they're going to able to sustain their lives. So it's costly, it's time consuming. So it's these things that we've said we really have to get going on these things now. So when I talked about the number of people that we have, they're really invested again, some of those big spaces where we know we need to make some big efforts now. We've also been trying to use data as our friend, right? We don't have perfect data, but we do know that, for example, 120 suppliers contribute to 56% of our carbon scope 3. So, okay, that's clear enough to say we better really be targeting those 120 suppliers, having the right conversations with them, understanding where they are on the kind of maturity curve, understanding where they are when it comes to how they're capturing their data and how they're thinking of it, and looking at how we really partner with them to go after this. And I think the last thing that I would say in this space is we've really also been talking about, it's all about collaboration and partnerships, and that's very much internally as much as externally. So I think how we all can collectively work together against these goals, especially where we have commonalities in suppliers, so that we aren't really driving them crazy and asking them to spend all their time reporting information to us in 15 different ways, but actually that they can be spending their time really working on how are they going to go after their sustainability targets, how are they going to carbon reduce. But equally, we're having lots of conversations internally about choices that we make. So, it is really hard to decarbonize a supplier. it's easier to make a choice to buy less of something, or to put it into a lighter weight bottle, or to take away packaging that's not necessary, etc. So trying to really work internally around making choices that allow us to reduce as much of the carbon up front, so that when we get to that point of what do we actually need to work with our suppliers on, it does sort of minimize it, so that we can ultimately hit the targets as soon as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Denise, Marriott, and your sustainability efforts.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously climate is a pretty critical point. Then many have talked about the commitments, the 2030, 2050, net zero, et cetera. I think that's a really important area where, again, I think none of us will be able to do what we need to do without the support of suppliers up and down our supply chain partners, et cetera, per Kai's comment. So I think this is a prime opportunity to engage diverse suppliers in the mix, both ensuring that they understand their role as they come into our supply chains, are already part of the supply chains, because so much of companies' impacts really looks down into the supply chain. You heard, for those of you who don't know, Scope 3 has a lot of pieces to it, but supply chain is a really, really big part of it. And that's where so much of the carbon footprint associated with companies really sits. So I think that's a very, very great intersection between diversity and driving diversity and the sustainability efforts that all of us are kind of undertaking. But for us, we also have other major areas of focus under the sustainability umbrella, right? We are trying to reduce our waste and our food waste. We're trying to source better products from a more sustainable and socially equitable perspective. We're trying to understand, how do we build better buildings and drive efficiencies? We're trying to take our 8,000 plus hotels and drive more efficiency within those buildings. And so I think throughout operations and different kinds of business as well, of course, the reduction of carbon specifically, and the efforts around climate are critical. I think really also, looking beyond that and thinking about where else are there opportunities, what areas do we need to kind of keep focusing on and moving forward, even as the critical focus on climate really dials way up. And it won't be long before the SEC roles aren't just looking at carbon, but looking at water, because the water stress associated with climate. It's not going to be long before we start looking at waste and the impact that has on climate, on water, on food security, on social, et cetera. So I think, for us, we do have a big umbrella. And light keeps going off here. It's very environmentally responsible, this building here. The lights go off a lot. But in addition to kind of, again, thinking about what our, transition needs to look at, really thinking about the just transition. I know a lot of people talk about that, but what are the social impacts of the transition to more sustainable operations across our world, and what does that look like for all of us? And so again, I think this intersection opportunity is just only getting bigger, both to help educate and ensure that diverse suppliers understand their role and can be part of the solutions, but also, we're all going to need to source products and services to help us drive these efforts forward. So I think, again, just a great opportunity to connect the dots.
Yeah, there's a whole lot happening behind the Marriott brand with all those suppliers. Lisa, so sustainability in your current approach.
Sure. So we're $6+ billion company with only in 60 some products in 100 and some markets. We only have 6 manufacturing sites. So we are very heavily outsourced. Every product has some node that's outsourced to some extent. So our focus really is on making sure that our suppliers have reduction programs and targets in place. Our internal sites, we're lucky, our 6 sites were inherited from Merck, right, post-spin. So they have good, strong programs in solar and usage reductions and things like that. We're looking at our fleet, like I'm sure everybody is, in terms of what we can do there. We're looking at our transportation and how we set up our supply chains to lower our footprints related to that as well. So those are most of the programs that I think we're working on at this point in terms of sustainability.
Terrific. Let's talk a bit about, and this might be a quick question but I'll be interested in your answers. When we think about human trafficking and modern slavery, and that's certainly a component of ESG, and many of us have statements out on this and or have embedded it in our risk governance. But just wondering, you know, and maybe Kai, you can start again. What do you guys? How's it addressed in your company and with your diverse suppliers, or with your suppliers in general? Sorry.
I think we would all agree it's part of our code of conduct, right? Supplier code of conduct, that's what we all demand, that's what we put on our website, that's what we put in our statements, that's what we put in our contracts, that's what we put in our general terms and conditions. And I'm sure everybody is, before engaging with the supplier, checking it and so on and so forth. So I think we're doing all from a contractual point of view what you can do, and we're doing probably a lot for the suppliers that providing services where this type of topics could be of the highest risk. And I think if we were all to do it with parts of our suppliers, at the end we have done it with all suppliers. For my particular case that I'm looking at is really the culture of transparency that we're trying to drive with our suppliers on the things that we're expecting, but also on the ways we want to measure and the ways we want to get it reported back. And it's, in our case, the stuff that I'm buying, it is really when it's labor, wage, labor conditions related. And I think there are frameworks out there that we really try everything. But again, it comes back to this data and transparency, and I think we all need to invest more in finding the right companies, the right data sources, the right multipliers to really get behind the skin and behind the scene, right? We can contractually do everything. We can audit partially. I have 30,000 suppliers. Can I audit them all? Impossible. Even with millions and hundreds of millions of money, I couldn't. So we need to find a smarter way that misbehaviors are spotted and everybody knows they will be spotted. And that's, I find it difficult to say, but I say it. I have a good feeling we have it under control. But who in this panel or on the 300 people participating could say hand on heart, it may not happen at one misbehaved supplier who is with the back to the wall, is having a bad person behaving. Nobody can, right? So I think we do everything humanly possible. We all try to put the right measures, the right thing in place. We try to focus on the big risk areas. And the most critical piece is to react immediately, even in a case when you're spotting it, right? And make it public and make big noise and make that one the wall of shame company. But that's how we are doing it. So it's really targeted to the highest risk countries, right? Highest risky type of works, so to speak. And then the rest is really trying to find multipliers and intelligent data solutions that can help us to learn from it. That's how I'm seeing it at this point in time. That's all what you can do humanly possible, right? That's a little bit, yeah. You need to accept there's something you can and something you cannot do.
Tammy, anything to add differently or something else innovative you're doing in this space?
No, I mirror Kai's sentiments as it relates to this area, making sure you've got a good, strong, robust code of conduct, making sure you've got a good human rights policy that you're following, and making sure that you have identified those high risk countries, high risk commodities in which this type of behavior is being conducted in, and making sure you've got good measures around those to ensure that you got a good feel for what's going on in your supply base. But my sentiments are just as Kai had said.
I'm going to put it out there. Adam, Janelle, anything to add on this?
Repeat the question for me again.
It's
Sorry.
just around monitoring or thinking about modern
yeah,
slavery
okay.
and what you're doing or how your company,
Sorry, I was
governs it.
distracted by Kai's notion of having all the money and time in the world to get it done. I think that the some of the models that we have developed on auditing and monitoring for human rights and responsible minerals over the last 10 to 15 years from a lot of companies and industries can be driven and extended to environmental impact. And I think what part of the reality that we need to face as international companies is that we're balancing what we want to do with the regulatory impacts or the public procurement rules and other things that we need to keep up with. So we need to, as ESG practitioners and folks who are in charge of doing the right thing, make sure that we're also delivering the value and delivering that license to operate for our companies around the world. And so that's going to drive a risk lens to that approach. Yes, we can't do everything everywhere and audit everything, but we need to make sure we understand what are the most important things to audit to support our business and to support the people in our companies and in our supply chains, and to protect the work that we're doing.
Lisa, Denise, anything to add?
Yeah. Sorry, I'll jump in. One perspective that we have, in addition to the kind of the suppliers piece, which of course is important, and having the right policies, is to educate our associate base. We have developed we're on our second iteration of human trafficking training for our awareness training for our associates. We've already educated over 900,000 associates around the world, and we've given that training back to the industry for others to use. This should not be a competitive space. We all need to have eyes and ears and hearts in the right direction in this space and really be part of the solution. And so this is really a very, very important part of how we tackle this. We have a human rights council that the executive leadership meets on regularly to talk about, both the technology solutions, of course, but also, the examples from our hotels of how they've identified and recognized human trafficking happening in the highest, fanciest of hotels around the world, and the way that they've been able to oftentimes get some apprehension of perpetrators is just phenomenal. And for people to have that empowerment, to feel like if they know enough, they know that they can do something and say something, and that action just has literally saved lives, and it's just amazing. So I think that's, for us, is a real big focus for us, is how we have eyes on the ground and people paying attention to this very important topic.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and in your industry, invaluable. So I think what we're going to do now is, because we could spend a lot more time, and we probably aren't going to even make it through all the questions, but I did want to open it up, Michael, if there was any questions on the line.
Not yet. Just ask everybody that's attending, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. And
so if you have a question for anybody, you can either put the name or just ask the question, and then we'll open it to the panelists on who can respond.
And Sheila, I have one question for the panelists, and this is just an open question. How do you prioritize which ESG areas or elements need the most focus and resources?
So I'll start. They all get focused. It's kind of one of those things where there's not one that's more important than the other. We have made outward, not just to our board, but publicly, defined goals in all of these spaces. And so definitely I am measured by that, the success of of many people in Moody's in our organization is measured by this, and as well as what our communities and our customers expect of us. So there's not one that I can say is more important than the other. I will tell you some probably take more time in order to deal with, like from a sustainability and reporting, there's some labor intensive areas, but they're all getting a great amount of focus. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, it's not like you just kind of pick and choose which ones you want to focus on. However, we look to the industry and we look to other organizations to see what are the things that are important to them. We look to our investors, what kind of questions are they asking? What are the things that they seem to be more focused on? And so we try to build our priorities around those specific areas, because that's driving it to the next level.
And maybe I would echo a lot what you said. First of all, I think we all need to be aware of the impact we are having and the right to ask others to behave the way we want them to behave. And that means, for me, no compromises. I'm not compromising on anything. That's the first thing. And we need to be aware of all that impact and all the discussions. Like Denise, I like what you said. It's not a competition here, right? This is we all trying to solve for the best, and therefore we're sharing the best of everything we know. And if we spot a supplier misbehavior, we should be able to share it across this gang here, and nobody should ever deal with a supplier again. That's my first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, and like, tell me where you were going. At the end of the day, we need to prioritize where we can create the highest impact, right? There is no compromise, but then there are focus areas where we can say, okay, I don't produce anything. So do I go into this type of focus areas? Probably not, but I buy a lot of labor. That's the focus area I go in. And I think it's always, you need to put the efforts where you can make an impact, short, mid, and long term. But I think the most critical one is we all need to openly talk about things that we are spotting and immediately correcting it as partners, and not saying, hey, I found something, but I don't tell anybody. Let them trap into the same trap again. That is some sort of a mindset that in that case doesn't fit, and I think has changed a lot of company collaboration cultures in the last decade or so.
Michael?
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, if I may just make a comment, I think it's a really good question. One of the things that many of these goals or aspirations that we're going to are at a corporate level. So our CEOs or our boards have approved these goals. So oftentimes when I work with our sourcing orgs and they talk about prioritization, I kind of take a step back and say, we've already prioritized this. It's not a question of can we do this or are we going to do this. However, we are not in the business of ESG, we're in the business of business, and we have to acknowledge the degree of risk and time scale. And so it's not necessarily just a materiality question or what do you need to do today, but it's really balancing that risk to the business, as I mentioned before, and where we need to really focus, making sure that we can't dig holes any deeper in the case of engaging with risky suppliers in certain ways. And we need to, as we said, bring additional suppliers to the table who can help support those goals or way upstream of those decisions. So maybe prioritization in a short term is the right conversation, but prioritization in the long term, and many of these are 2030 goals or 2040 goals or whatever, that's already been set. And so that's usually where I start that conversation.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, and I think very importantly, obviously, I think, Adam, to your point, we've already set these priorities, right? Companies already have goals. We're already working towards those goals. So when or if there is another priority that comes onto your plate, I think the question to ask is what then has to go? And that makes it, part of the tough conversations, right? We can do this, but something else has to go because we already had, a fully packed list of priorities. But I think what gets measured gets done, right? So I think just ensuring that we are working towards goals, you're working towards those efforts that can be measurable, to be able to, both for the teams to be able to feel supported and that they're driving in the right direction, and to be able to point to something and say, okay, we are heading in that direction and go. So I think that's how priorities.
So this has been a terrific conversation, and honestly, I see the questions popping up, but I do think we're going to have to collect them, and I promise we will collect them. I think that this meeting and this forum clearly articulated the need for further dialogue in this space. I know it's central to the success of Moody's and central to your companies as well. I think this was only the beginning, and with the daunting task, less than 7 years to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Gosh, I'm just going to say, I think what we've uncovered is that we all are an untapped resource, and I think using, if Elizabeth doesn't mind asking, that we establish an ESG global roundtable through WEConnect International as our convening body. I think we could get together, you can have different members attend, and we can all get together and continue to discuss these initiatives. It just becomes more and more imperative. Elizabeth, if that's something that you'd be willing to help.
I love it. Count us in. I'm so grateful for everyone sharing their experience. It's clear that everyone is on a journey. All of us are on a journey. Some of us have been doing this for longer, and we were able to figure out ways to feature organizations that have been doing this for a long time, organizations that are new to this, and we're all in this together. And really grateful, Sheila, for your leadership and commitment.
No, terrific. So thank you all. What we will do is reach out to you and your organizations to invite you to participate in further discussions on this topic in a roundtable. So, we'll be reaching out, we'll be looking for that, whether it's something that we meet monthly or quarterly or something, but I do think that this was invaluable. So I thank you all for your time today. And panelists, I thank you for participation and all of your insights.